can't be alive in no time. But now, it's just another shot to the heart. It's just a short shot in the dark. It's just another place in the stars. Wonders on every side. Life in marvelous time. Life in marvelous time.
Hello everyone, my name is Anson Asaka. I'm the founder of New Possibility blog, and today I want to talk about the George Zimmerman case. Today was the first day of trial, and I just want to share some of the key points from the trial and just share some of my views about the case so far. One of the most important points in the opening statements of the prosecution was the fact that George Zimmerman profiled Trayvon Martin. In his opening remarks, the prosecutor opened with some profane words, and these words came from George Zimmerman. He talked about how George Zimmerman complained about fucking punks. He talked about how George Zimmerman said, "These assholes always get away." George Zimmerman didn't know anything about Trayvon Martin, but he assumed that Trayvon Martin was up to no good. Why did he assume that Trayvon Martin was up to no good? Because Trayvon Martin was black. That's why. The only reason why he labeled him as suspicious is because he was a young black man in his neighborhood. And George Zimmerman thought that he had the right to determine who belongs in the neighborhood and who doesn't belong in the neighborhood. Why would he use such language to refer to a young man that he did not know? That's because George Zimmerman already had animosity in his heart. So that was one of the key points that the prosecution brought out during the trial, during the opening statements today. Another key point that the prosecution brought out was the fact that there is no DNA evidence that supports the claim that Trayvon Martin caused George Zimmerman's injuries. George Zimmerman, like I said in the last tape, claims that Trayvon Martin punched him in the nose. And he also claims that his nose was bleeding, and there are photographs of George Zimmerman's nose bleeding. There's photographs of the back of George Zimmerman's head bleeding. And he claims that during this struggle with Trayvon Martin covered his nose and his mouth, the same nose that was bleeding. He claims that Trayvon Martin covered his nose. If Trayvon Martin covered his nose, there would be blood on Trayvon Martin's hands. There would be blood on Trayvon Martin's cuffs. But when you look at the medical reports, when you look at the DNA reports, it's clear, as I said before, that none of George Zimmerman's blood is on Trayvon Martin's hands or on the cuffs of Trayvon Martin's jacket. That sounds fishy. And then George Zimmerman claims that he was the one screaming on the 911 tape. If he was the one screaming on that tape, how could he scream if Trayvon Martin supposedly had his hands over his mouth? Something doesn't add up. Also, George Zimmerman claims that Trayvon Martin went for his gun. He claims that Trayvon Martin was trying to get his gun, so he claims that he was in a struggle for his life. But yet there's none of Trayvon Martin's DNA on the holster or on the gun, according to the prosecution. So again, something stinks about George Zimmerman's story. It doesn't add up. If Trayvon Martin reached for his gun or touched his holster, there would have to be some DNA evidence there. But then again, as I said before, there was no DNA evidence. George Zimmerman claims that he was overpowered by Trayvon Martin. But George Zimmerman weighed much more than Trayvon Martin. George Zimmerman took self-defense classes. George Zimmerman took kickboxing lessons for over a year, according to the prosecution. And there are plenty of stories that document this. Yet he claims that he was overpowered by a thin teenager. Something about that story stinks to me. George Zimmerman claims, that Trayvon Martin banged his head on the concrete many times and caused it to bleed. But yet the laceration was very small, as the prosecution says on their opening statement. The cut was very small, less than an inch in length. So clearly, the claim of George Zimmerman had to have been exaggerated. George Zimmerman went to the medical examiner. George Zimmerman went to his doctor after this incident occurred. He didn't go to his doctor to get treatment. He went to his doctor so he would have a note to give to his employer, according to the prosecution. He didn't go because he was dizzy. He didn't go to the doctor because he had a headache. He didn't go to the doctor because he suffered from vomiting or nausea. He went to the doctor so that he could get a medical excuse for his absence from work. Again, something about George Zimmerman's story stinks. One of the main final points that the prosecution made was during this altercation, there's screaming, a long period of screaming for help. Again, as I said before, George Zimmerman claims that that was him screaming. But George Zimmerman claims that his mouth was covered. If your mouth was covered, how the hell are you screaming? How are you screaming so loudly and clearly if your mouth is covered? And then when the shot goes off, the screaming immediately stops. The screaming immediately stops. That should tell you that the person that was screaming was the person that was shot. That person was Trayvon Martin. Even if you're in a struggle and you're fighting for your life and you fire a shot at your aggressor, you're still going to be excited. It's likely that you will still be screaming for help. But here, George Zimmerman claims that he was the one in danger, but yet the screaming immediately stopped after the shot was fired. But yet he wants us to believe that he was the one screaming. And as I said on the last tape, George Zimmerman, when he heard the voice on the tape, he said, that doesn't even sound like me. So something about this story stinks. George Zimmerman is lying. Let's keep it real. George Zimmerman made up this story. And he claims that his nose was broken. But no medical reports support that claim. The doctor that he went to after the incident said that his nose was not broken. So he's been exaggerating his story. And his family have exaggerated the story. And I just want to make one other point. During the court hearings, it pained me. It hurt me. It angered me to see Trayvon Martin's family crying in court. I feel their pain. I can only imagine what the pain must be like to hear the prosecution describe the last moments of your son's life. I could feel their pain. But when I looked over to the defense table, I saw a callous, fat, no good killer sitting there stone-faced, emotionless, looking like he was out of it. Something tells me that something is wrong with that man. Something is wrong with him. And even worse than that, You would expect a killer to be callous, but his lawyers are even as bad as he is. His lawyer had the audacity to start out his opening statement with a knock-knock joke. What the hell is wrong with his lawyer? I don't understand how any professional could do such a thing, given the circumstances of this case. We're talking about the life of a young black man that was killed, snuffed out at the age of 17. And this man, this lawyer, this so-called professional has the nerve to start out his opening statement with a silly-ass knock-knock joke. That's an outrageous, ridiculous way to start out an opening statement. And I'm going to tell you something. I hope and pray that this trial is a fair trial. I hope that George Zimmerman is locked up for the rest of his life. Because I'm telling you, if he is not locked up, if there is no justice in this case, there will be hell to pay. I don't condone violence, but I know what time it is. I know that the people are angry as hell. They want justice. And if they can't get justice in the courts, if they can't get justice from the police, the people will take to the streets and demand justice. In the words of Bob Marley, there will be burning and looting tonight. Again, I don't condone violence. I'm more like a weatherman who looks at the signs, who calculates, who measures things based on science. You don't blame the weatherman when he forecasts a tornado. You don't blame the weatherman when he forecasts a hurricane. Well, I'm here to say that if there is no justice for Trayvon Martin, there will be riots or rebellions, not only in Florida, but probably around this country. So it's very important that we take this trial seriously. And when you have a prosecution, no, not the prosecution, when you have a defense team that wants to make light of a most serious matter, that only escalates the situation. That only throws fuel on a fire. So I'm praying for justice. I'm praying for peace. And with that, I just say we need one thing, and that's justice for Trayvon Martin.
Can't be alive in no time, but now it's just another shot to the heart. It's just a short shot in the dark. It's just another place in the stars. Wonders on every side. Life in marvelous time. Life in marvelous time.